let me please introduce our wonderful panelists. We have Kelly Thorne, who wave to the crowd.
Hi, hi, hi.
Many of you know her. Obviously, she's a multiple-time Shaker and Spoon alum, and she is a very well-known spirits educator and beverage consultant, and also a member of a group that are designated as educators by the not only tourism board, but like the BNIC is basically like the how would you describe BNIC best, Kelly?
Well, it's like a group that is comprised of merchants and winegrowers in Cognac. They were founded in 1946, and they're essentially, I mean, I guess the best way to think of it is like they are the protectors of this spirit, and they kind of govern over this spirit and make sure that there's not false cognac going out into the world, if you will.
Yeah.
That's kind of the base of it.
Which is quite a task, because that's that and like single malt whiskey pops up quite often. Second. Okay, terrific. Well, anyway, we're super pleased to have you and can't wait to dive into Cognac.
To be here.
Michael Holiday is over here, and he's over here in my right-hand corner. He's with us from DC. He's managing partner at 600T and also co-founder of Chocolate City's Best. And again, like everybody's IG handles are over there on the right-hand side. So he's joining us today. So he's as of this month, he will be a Shaker and Spoon alum. He created the cocktail that's in this box along with Kelly's and Frankie's. It's delicious. And he also won this crazy Hennessy competition right in the middle of COVID and still hasn't been able to claim that prize. So we're going to talk about that later.
All right. Hello, everybody.
Great to have you join us. And then Jordan Bushell, last but certainly not least, global brand ambassador for Hennessy, has been with that brand for over 11 years now, more. Yeah. Longtime bartender, bar owner, road warrior, tramp, scallion, scamp, rapscallion, all those things. So we've got a really great crew here to talk about Cognac as a spirit and to allow us to dive into cocktails. So all the fun things that you guys brought home in order to make all the Shaker and Spoon cocktails, you'll be able to use them in fun and different ways. So I'm going to dive right in. If you guys noticed the image that I used, I actually put an ice cream cone next to a yak so that we can just get the pronunciation of cognac out of the way right at the beginning. But Jordan, I would love for you to start off, since you get to repeat this a 1,000 times a day when you're on the road, when the world is normal. If you can give like a brief overview of the category of cognac.
Sure. So cognac is, I'm going to talk fast and loud because that's the way to get through this. The reason cognac is, one of the reasons it's so misunderstood is that there's not a font small enough or a label large enough to print it on the back of all the bottles or boxes. So we just avoid that altogether. And basically, cognac at its heart is three different things. It's a city in France, the southwest of France. It's part of an area known as the Charente department or Charente region, which sometimes, well, most of the time gets called the Cognac region. But what that means is it's the AOC of Cognac, the appellation origin of control. For any other spirit out there, that would be a domain of origin. So tequila's got a domain of origin, bourbon's got its domain of origin. Many spirits and wines all have their domain of origin, even cheeses, which is where it all started. But beyond that, it's also a brandy. And so what I find, and I think Kelly can probably attest to this as well, that when you go in to educate on cognac, oftentimes you're actually educating on the entire category of brandy, because as cognac educators, you're often the first brandy educator anyone has seen, almost like a Scotch educator walking in and educating on every single whiskey you'd ever heard of. So brandy, loosely, is specifically is a distillate of fruit wine. The European Union would dictate that needs to be grapes, and that then most of the world has acquiesced to that, saying that every brandy out there will, if it doesn't have a grape distillate as its backbone, will stipulate on the label what it's made from, whether that be apple brandy, pear brandy, like Calvados, or oftentimes you'll read apricot brandy, and it will, in the fine print, be a grape brandy with apricot flavoring, many things like that. Cognac, though, more specifically, is based on white wine from the growing cru within Cognac, to which there are 6 cru, which we'll get into later. But the primary varietal you're going to need to know for Cognac, it makes up, to date, about 99% of Cognac is Uni Blanc, UGNI space BLANC, otherwise known in Italian grape growing circles as Trebbiano. So you don't often see Uni Blanc made into wine that doesn't then become a distillate, but in Italy, as the French and the Italians don't agree on much, it is known as Trebbiano. And but we have Uni Blanc, and there are a few other varietals, but in 15 minutes we're not going to cover those. Uni Blanc is the major varietal. The reason being that it provides all the things we need in a great Cognac grape, meaning that when we grow it, it has a good amount of acidity and then fruit in the background. Why do we need acidity? Because we are distilling this thing twice through copper pot stills, and to distill something, we're concentrating a lot of those flavors. And with the wine, while we're waiting to distill it, we don't want it to go off. So that high acidity also acts as a preservative, along with temperature controls and things like that. The wine we're using is around, ideally, want about 8-9% alcohol, but it can vary from 6, and with global warming, more recently, 10% or more. So if you don't believe global warming is a thing, you're on the fence about that, you're wrong.
You've got some there's some farmers who would like to chat with you, for sure.
Yeah, there's people in Cognac that would like to chat with you. We've got a lot of research and development going into how we preserve Cognac for the future if these grapes are going to change. We harvest these grapes traditionally, it would have been in October, but because of this warming, we've started to harvest in September to offset that kind of warmer months. So we're harvesting. After we're done harvesting, we do a fermentation where we're turning it into that wine. We're double copper pot distilling. We can only distill in a window from when it's done fermenting until the end of March. So April 1st, joke's on you, you're not making Cognac anymore, you're making something else. So at that point, we've distilled it twice. First distillate comes through, turns into something called Bruy. That's my dog's name, he just looked up at me. Bruy is around 30 to 31% alcohol. After the Bruy goes back through a second time, it becomes, a number of things, heads, tails, seconds, but at the main part, the core, the heart, what we want, what we then call eau de vie. So eau de vie is the water of life. That is what we then put in oak and age for a minimum of 2 years. So as many of you were probably in the Facebook conversation with Ask Me Anything, minimum age is 2 years, but I don't know any Cognac that, and maybe Kelly could pipe in here, but I don't know any Cognac that is just a minimum of 2 years. Most of them go well beyond that, because one of the things you have to think about here, if I go off on a small tangent, is most of the other aged spirits out there, in fact, almost all of them are going to have a much more consistent distillate. If you're not dealing with fruit, you have a much more consistent distillate. If we just compare straight to whiskey, you have a really consistent distillate in grain, that your inconsistency comes when you get to the barrel, but your distillate should be 99.9% the same time in and time out. Whereas every grape is going to change every season, but every field to field, the vine to vine, they're going to be slightly different in the same calendar year. And distillation at its core is a concentration, like boiling a sauce down to strengthen that sauce. You're concentrating those things. If it's slightly different as a wine, it's going to get more different and more farther apart and more variables as you concentrate those flavors down. And then we also have the variable that is the barrel. So when you think about that in cognac production, that's why we have a vast array of ages in a blend, because we're trying to create consistency. And when we talk about a blend in cognac, we are not speaking about a blend in the way that blended Scotch whiskey would do, where they have a base of one spirit and then they're blending single malts to create their own distinctive house style. For us, it's a blend like any aged spirit to create a consistency from an age range. Though in cognac, you tend to see a larger age range. Hennessy VS, for instance, our youngest offering is 2 to 8 years old. And that's pretty common within the VS characteristics. As you go up in age, you tend to see a wider range of ages in that blend. That was that 15 minutes? I can keep going.
We're already at an hour and a half, so you're good.
Perfect.
Jordan, you're done for the day. Thank you.
I'll end with something to break it down quite simply, and it's it can work for every cognac house, but it's something that Hennessy has broken their education down into 3 pillars, which is selection, maturation, and blending. And when you select, great eau de vie, and then you allow them to mature properly. Notice I'm using the word mature, not age, because age is just a number. As my mother likes to say, age and maturity are not the same thing. You can get older. It doesn't mean you're getting more mature. But different cognacs from different cru are going to age at different, in general, in different ways and provide different things. But we're constantly monitoring them through their maturation. So when it's mature, not when it's reached a certain age, but when that eau de vie is mature and that eau de vie has reached its potential, then it comes time to blend. And if you do all of those steps correctly, the selection, the maturation, and the blending, you can make a great cognac. And cognac is the most heavily regulated spirit on the planet. And I truly believe, and many of you saw me put it in print in the Facebook chat, there are no bad cognacs. There are good to great. If you took the worst cognac by your tastes, because everybody's tastes are different, and I truly believe you could put it up against the mid-range of almost any other category of spirit out there. Our heavy regulations mean you have to be at least good, or it doesn't get past the BNIC.
One thing that Kelly, we chatted about a little bit, that Jordan brought up right now, is the keeping up with the Joneses concept of age statements, which I always think is really interesting. So you have, the three distinct categories of people know the most: VS, VSOP, XO, and those have minimum age statements attached to them. But as we all know, just like what Jordan just said, they're almost always blends, and B, it has nothing to do with the number as much as when it's ready. So even though VS has that base, like, so many people are aging it at a point that's over what would be the minimum age for VSOP, just because that's right for that particular product.
Yeah, like Jordan said, you're never going to see just a straight up 2-year VS, or I too have never seen that occur, but I have seen plenty of VSOPs that are actually minimally aged at 15 years, or that's the youngest spirit in the bottle, but that producer still chooses to call that their VSOP expression, even though they could call it their XO. It really, like, that there is nothing younger that can go into this, but it wildly varies as far as what people are actually putting in the bottle. And to Jordan's point, like, the production of cognac has to be, like, there's only a few months window where we're actually making the eau de vie that goes into barrel. The magic of cognac takes place in the cellar, and that's where a lot of the work is taking place. I mean, months and months and months of kind of experiencing, it's experiential. There's not really like a data chart that they look at. They're tasting these, they're going through these and kind of experiencing them and deciding what are going into these blends. It's not something that's just like, oh, that one's definitely ready. It has to be more experiential than that.
What are the, just for everybody in the group, what are the minimum age statements of those three main designations?
VS is 2 years, VSOP minimum age 4 years, and XO minimum age 10 year.
Right. So, and that's new also. That's like 2018. Was that is that when the change happened?
So Jordan, can you help me out? Is
Yeah.
that when it officially
Yeah.
went
It's confusing because it was supposed to be 2016 that it moved from XO moved from minimum 6 years to 10 years. It was supposed to happen in 2016, but they moved it to 2018 just so every house wasn't, put under the
because
pressure to get
transit,
it done.
it takes a minute to get things done.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So
I mean-
in 2018, the minimum age moved to 10 years for XO, meaning that any XO after April 1st, 2018 needed to be, if it was bottled after that date, it needed to be minimum age of 10 years. But again, many XOs go well beyond that.
It's kind of funny. That 2 years difference. They're like, well, it's been 150 years. What's another 2 years, right? So I don't think anybody struggled with those 24 months. In terms of consumers' biggest questions about the category, one of the reasons why I was excited to have all three of you be able to talk to the Shaker and Spoon audience is because of the fact that you each have very unique viewpoints on this. Jordan's obviously been an evangelist specifically for this category now for over a decade. Kelly's completely in love with the category and is like a certified educator for it. And Mr. Holiday here is a huge personal fan of the category and is also, I mean, up until recently, Kelly, you were also running a group of bars and restaurants. But Michael, of all of us here, Michael's spending the most time with the consumer, like with guests in bars. And so I wanted to get his take. By the way, are you outside in the rain right now, dude?
I am outside in the rain. We are fully operational inside. I couldn't find a quiet place, so I grabbed my umbrella, and I'm just making it work,
Listen, I mean, that is the bartender's main job, is just to make it work. So I would love for you to talk about a little bit, because we'll go back into sort of like the nitty gritty of the category of cognac. What is it that you think that your guests, what is the reaction you get when you try and talk to them about the category or make cognac cocktails for them? What are some of the like misnomers they have about cognac? And what are some of the things that they really love and are surprised about it?
So cognac, me personally, I have a soft spot in my heart for cognac because of the way I was brought up and the memories that it brings back at gatherings, graduations, weddings. Usually any like high elevation in the Black community was always a bottle of cognac, and to be specific, it was Hennessy. To be honest, unfortunately, at the bar these days, it seems as if consumers are leaning more towards agave spirits. And when it comes to cognac, it takes more of I get more of the, I guess we would call like the old heads, right? Or the OGs. They're the ones that come in, they want to taste the cognac. And they usually come in like a sidecar or something like that. But then with, a little bit of education from bartender to consumer, we can go down this rabbit hole of amazing cognac cocktails or like new creations. So it's really up to us, the bartenders in the new age, to continue to educate and let the new consumers know why cognac's been so great. It's always been great, again, to me and my community, because like you go back to like the Harlem Renaissance, you had so many amazing talents going to France, right? And 20 years later, we had the World War II, where so many Black Americans were treated like true champions over in Paris, and they're always greeted with like cognac or champagne, and that transferred when they came back to America. So here in America, when they wanted to sell or wanted to feel that feeling of greatness or excellence that they felt over in Europe, we opened up a bottle of cognac. And again, 9 out of 10, it was a great bottle of Hennessy. Till this day, I know at my celebrations, whether it was my wedding where we unloaded cases of cognac, of Hennessy Privilege, or my wife's graduation that's happening May 22nd. She's graduating from Georgetown Medical School. We're gonna have so much Hennessy, Hennessy Privilege in the house in all different type of ways with amazing jazz and true Black excellence, you know? So again, I don't know if I answered your question. I was just rambling, hoping that you guys still got me on the connection.
Yes, we can hear and see you. So you truly believe that the Black community in the United States has embraced the category of cognac specifically because of that relationship with Hennessy in France in the 40s?
I believe so. I think the Harlem science was going on outside of the U.S. and being treated, a little bit more humane. And if you can relate to it, they brought that back to bring it to their families at celebrations, and not just for a remnant of a great time in France, but just a remnant of like feeling appreciated, right? And then that carried over. I believe from my lectures or from my readings, cognac back then was not really even consumed by Europeans. It was mostly consumed by Americans and exported to like African Americans. Trace it back to more relevant, more recent events, like in the 90s and the early 2000s. You listen to East Coast hip hop, right? Even West Coast hip hop, Tupac all day, right? Tupac, my Hennessy, come on, man. We're talking about Busta Rhymes, Pastor Cavassier, like Nas, Jay-Z. Nas, who like is one of my favorite artists, and if Jordan, if you could happen, I know Nas, a representative of Hennessy. You can make that happen. Me and Nas, sit down,
Yes,
talk.
he is.
I will make all the cocktails. I would
Basically,
You're
love
not
that.
the first person to say that.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Last time I saw Nas, it was in the Kennedy Center. I don't know if he was Hennessy ambassador back then, but that's that feeling that we received. That elegance, that grace. Actually, Hennessy was, I believe, the first major corporation contributor to the NCAAP financially, help get things going. And then, when I was a kid,
Yeah,
we'd
they
be in
were
a
one of the
barbershop.
founding sponsors.
Exactly. Yes, the founding sponsors. And then when in a barbershop or my grandfather's barn, his basement, looking at those old Jet magazines. For those who know about Jet, I was looking for the Jet Beauty of the Week, but you always saw those you saw those Hennessy ads, right? Where they portrayed people of color with such grace and such, right? Not saying I want to drink Hennessy, but I'm like, when I get older, I want to live that life. That representation mattered, and not saying that it was all monetized, because like I said, they contributed to NAACP and they continue to contribute to other Black efforts to this day. So it's, it's like a mutual situation, and they truly show the pathway to equity. I think of other cognac brands owned by people of color. It came from that representation of, wait, I can do this. This is possible. So, I just see cognac in general, whatever brand it may be, it always holds a great place in my heart. And those who are from, 80 babies, 90 babies, they feel me. I just hope that it can continue so I can drink a glass of cognac with my grandson and my son when they're 21, and, for them to really appreciate it. So
I'm glad you put because this is being recorded, I'm glad you put the age statement in there. That's important. Yeah, you make a really good point. The representation aspect now is something that we see all the time by multiple brands. You almost if someone has a commercial or some sort of advertisement where you don't have, or it doesn't look like a Benetton ad, and of course that's the first thing that pops into my head because they were one of the first apparel brands to really do that in terms of sort of a having everybody represented. It was, as you said, Jet Magazine, Ebony were some of the first ever to have Black representation and to actually talk about, cognac, to have cognac advertisements. So that's a really great point. But it's, of course, they never play Busta Rhymes at the Hennessy Maison just because, you're talking about another brand.
No, but Busta's at all the events. He gets a case of VSOP sent to him all the time.
Even though he talked about somebody else, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because Hennessy didn't rhyme in that particular sentence.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Past the
He got paid
privilege.
$0 for that. He loved cognac so much he wanted to sing about it. So it wasn't an advertisement. It was just it worked in his rhyme.
I mean, past the privilege is alliteration. I'm just saying he had that opportunity. It's a wasted opportunity. Just saying. What I'd love to talk about is as we continue the sort of nitty gritty on cognac itself, I'd love to hear from Kelly as to why you love cognac so much, and then follow up with, then we'll get into the cru.
Oh, so you want me to just wax poetic about why I love cognac so much right
Yes,
now?
and feel free to mix in the cru, because that's an important piece that I really want people to understand.
Okay, yeah.
this
Well,
category.
I guess I will start with the crus, and then we can kind of talk about why I think this spirit is so special. But Jordan mentioned earlier, so cognac is in itself a region. It's a town, it's a vineyard, it's an area. Within the region of cognac, there are 6 subregions, and we call those crus. There's Petit Champagne and Grand Champagne. They're kind of at the center. Grand Champagne is considered kind of, this like golden cru of cognac. Not that we want to discount any of the others, because they all have their amazing attributes. From Petit Champagne, you have Fembois, and then Borderie, Bambois, and Bois au Terroir. And essentially, these were delineated by, there is a man, a paleontologist and geologist named Henri Coquand, and he teamed up with a taster in 1860, and they went around and studied the soils in the region, and then also tasted the eau de vies and kind of delineated these 6 crus based upon the fact that the eau de vies, depending on where they were growing, had distinctly different characteristics to them. So Petit and Grand Champagne, the soil, the champagne comes from actually the type of soil that's there, extremely chalky. In fact, when you taste these really young eau de vies, or you taste them before they've seen any barrel, you get almost like what I call a petrichor characteristic to it, kind of like a wet cement minerality. Fembois, and those crus, that takes a long time for the grapes to the grapes that are grown there, it takes a long time for the eau de vies that are produced from that to reach full maturation. So often with Petit and Grand Champagne, especially with Grand Champagne, it's thought that it will be several decades before they really hit their apogee. Whereas when you come to Fembois, these tend to be fruitier eau de vies. They age a little bit faster. Borderie is the smallest of the crus. It has a really distinctive, interesting soil with lots of fossils, lots of marine fossils. That particular cru is said to produce really mineral-driven eau de vie with a lot of like kind of violet characteristics to it. And then you start to move out, right, into Bambois and Bois Ordinaire. When you get really far out, you actually have some vines that are growing amongst marine. It's kind of close to the water, and they're growing amongst the marine plants that are around there, and they're said to kind of take on characteristics of that particular terroir. So kind of depending on where these grapes are coming from, they will age in different ways. But the thing to remember is that these are also vast vineyards. So depending on where they're planted within that vineyard, they'll also age differently depending on how the sunlight is hitting them. So there's lots of factors that kind of go into what will ultimately be at the end of the production. And Jordan mentioned this also, but you don't like, you can't store grapes, and you can't really like, you can't freeze them. Once you pick them, you have to go ahead and ferment them and turn them into wine. And some of that wine will not, so you'll have wine that you're distilling kind of right after it got fermented, and then you'll have wine that is sitting to wait, and that wine does change over time. So depending on kind of like when that wine is being distilled, you'll get kind of a richer, more powerful eau de vie, or you'll get something that's a little more youthful and kind of vibrant. There's also choices like if they're going to include the lees or not. The lees are the dead yeast cells that are produced during fermentation. When we include those during distillation, they break apart and they create further esterification. So lots of flavors, but also lots of textures that can come through that. If they decide to leave it out, you tend to get a lighter style. If they do leave the lees in during distillation, you get a fuller and richer style. And I think that that's the thing, like with cognac, you know, everyone's kind of in a lot of ways limited to a lot of the same practices. They're all using the same grape varietals. They're all harvesting at the same time. They all have to do double distillation with a Charentes still. They're tightly monitored, the way the sizes of these stills and how much you can produce on this. They all have to see oak for at least 2 years. But outside of that, there's all of these little choices that can be made that can really impact what the final outcome is, from where it's being grown, what part of the vineyard it's being grown, how long these wines wait, what sorts of things are included, all the way to you know, how are they seeing brand new oak whenever they're coming off the still, or are they going into older oak? How long will they stay in new oak before they're moved to something that's a little bit older, that's not going to impart as many of those kind of oak characteristics to it? And then of course you have the different ages. And so to me, that's what makes cognac so special, is that you there's all of these possibilities for it, and kind of depending on the style you get, you might get something that is a little more powerful and rich, or you might get something that has a lot of really bright floral characteristics and fruit characteristics. And you're always going to get fruit because it's a brandy, but it's just kind of what the producer wants to feature. It's really in the hand of these people who are spending all this time in this cellar. And I always tell people that, you know, you should think of it as like a symphony of notes. It's more like a perfume than any other spirit that I know of. And so that's why I love mixing with it, because it's so versatile. If I wanted something that was a little more like, you know, spirit forward and stirred, and I'm going to putting it with these like bolder ingredients, like something bitter or something dark, then I'm going to go for something that might, you know, have a little more weight, a little more oak characteristics to stand up to that. But then if I want something that's really bright and refreshing, and I'm going to mix it with like cantaloupe and fresh citrus juice, then I might want something that has a little more of those youthful kind of fruity and floral characteristics to it.
I see Michael nodding along. Sorry, Mr. Holiday, excuse me. I see him nodding along to your commentary. I wanted to ask you both, when you're, I mean, Callie, for a lot of the cocktail menus that you've worked on in your former restaurant group, you had to make those decisions all the time. And Michael, as Mr. Holiday, someone who is constantly popping new cocktails on there and onto your menu, and also interacting with your guests in real time to, you know, bring them a cocktail based on, you know, what they're asking for. How do you choose what style? So I'm not even talking brand at this point. I'm talking about, like, when do you reach for Borderies? When do you reach for a Grand Cru? When do you teach for a Petit Champagne and Grand Champagne? Like, when are you reaching for those particular things to make a cocktail for your guests?
I'll let you go first, Mr. Holiday.
Sure. Yeah, so when it comes to like making, I guess, like cognac cocktails, if I want something that's like, if I'm going for like a drier cocktail, I usually go to cocktail, I usually go to cognac that's probably using like the, I don't know if I could say the Martell form of distillation. Or if I want something a little bit more jammy or something heavier, or maybe I'm going like for like a fall season, I might use something that's a little, you know, that's a little heavier marks, using like the Remy method of distillation, right? So I like to pair. It depends, man. I don't know really how to explain it. When I think of cocktails, it's I think of like the rhythm. You know, I think of like rhythm and that the spirit carries, and I add all these these other modifications, usually to really highlight a story or a memory of mine. So I might approach cocktails a little bit differently than others. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question. But yeah, so I like to pair things with intention. So if I want something um, to truly sing vibrant, I'm gonna go something lighter. But I am biased again because um, most of my memories include Hennessy, so I am biased. So I really just try to like make that work myself. So I don't really use other cognacs. There's one other cognac I use because of the equity that it provides to people of color, but I won't mention that one. But yeah, Hennessy's usually my go-to.
Understood. Listen, you've got a one-man cheering squad
Michael's
over
not
here.
paid by me. I'll put that out there as
No.
well.
That's awesome. I feel like Holiday's got his cocktail creation method as a combo of like Gary Regan and like Water for Chocolate. Like this, intention and emotion go into the creation of the drink. Have you ever made something with in the intention of like energy and you gave the cocktail to a guest and they became hyper? Or did you ever, put sadness into a drink and they started crying? Have you done that yet?
I mean, or at my bar actually, when we first got up and running, we became known for doing like dealer's choices. So it was like Thursday nights. We'd have like tonight, we'd have jazz playing, and we have guests come in, and we'll ask them what spirit they're feeling. We'll ask about like their mood and things of that nature. So yeah, I definitely played off of emotions of not just myself, but the guest to create something, and I believe told that story or that fed into that.
Awesome. Kelly, in terms of the thing that you and I talked about yesterday, in choosing a specific cognac, and you just listed a bunch of different things, both like with or without lees, the terroir of that particular crew that it came from, the hand of the maker, obviously, as Jordan was talking about earlier, the selection. Do you when you're choosing a cocktail, and you can go as narrow as you want, you can be very specific. You're like, hey, I made this cocktail once based on this specific type of, or this specific cognac because it came from this particular crew, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious.
Well, so I don't know, because a lot of times, and Jordan can attest to this, in a lot of times with what you're mixing with, you're getting kind of spirits that are produced across crews. So definitely, like, if I were,
Can you think of one cocktail, like an example where you're like, this is definitely in my mind, it's a cognac cocktail. You have that aroma and taste of a great distillate,
yeah.
but you maybe chose one and then moved to another based on its region. Again, like brand agnostic here, it was more about the characteristics that particular product brought to your drink.
I don't think that I've ever really based a cocktail specifically off of a crew, because I believe that there are too many factors outside of crew alone to like decide what the cocktail will be. Because so for me, it's more about like, sometimes it comes from tasting a spirit and then deciding what I want to complement or contrast, or it starts from a place of I have an ingredient and I want to figure out which spirit will best match to that. And so, or it will be, I would like to create something like an aperitif style cognac cocktail. And so which cognac best suits for that? And often I'm looking less at the actual crew, but I am looking for specific flavor profiles from that spirit all together. And that means that, if I want it to be like, I have this cocktail I do that's like almost like a 50-50 build of cognac and like fruit infused Blanc vermouth that I do during the spring, that just has like a little touch of elderflower and a little touch of celery bitters just to kind of round it out. But like that drink wouldn't work with something that has a really powerful oak presence. drink only works with something where the fruit and florality are really being featured. It has less to do necessarily, even though initially that is something that is a factor in how your cognac will turn out. It's rare that I choose specifically based on cru, and more about what all of the production choices were going into that spirit.
And that the final result is the lighter bodied, you know, is the
Yeah.
overall thing that you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Besides that sort of like cognac aperitif cocktail you're talking about, can you think of any other where you had an interesting ingredient and you were looking for which base spirit would go with it, and it turned out to be cognac? Can you think of any of those pairings that sort of like magically worked out?
Oh, well, I mean, wow. Like, have I told you how versatile cognac is?
No,
Like,
no, you haven't really talked about it at all.
have I told you that it has this like array of flavors in it? So that you can literally almost do anything with cognac that you want. Like if you're sitting there with a piece of chocolate and you're like, oh, I really wonder what spirit would go well with this, cognac will. But equally, if you're sitting with a flat of strawberries and you're like, I wonder what spirit could go with this, well, cognac will. So it's really like, it's not hard for me to find a plan for cognac once I have ingredients in front of me. It's just about finding kind of the right cognac to go with said ingredient.
I'll jump in and add to that, in that cognac can also be pretty screwy. When I first started kind of playing around with it, that you have that grape side and you have that barrel side, which is kind of, you know, the fruit and the spice. And sometimes you're making a cocktail and you're like, okay, well, I want to lean into that spice. So I'm going with one that's using more new oak, or one that's big and spicy and things like that. And you end up, some other ingredient took the spice category and you got the fruit out of it. So it's almost like gin in that way. Sometimes you're aiming for gin to follow the citrus route and you get the herbaceous route in the cocktail. And it's just something else in that cocktail has like shoved the cognac in one direction or another. And I find those are the most interesting for me now, is creating cocktails where I'm rather looking at the other ingredients, not the cognac, where I'm looking at the cognac and I'm saying, well, where do I want this to go? And what other ingredients are going to push it in that direction?
I want to ask, did you figure out which cocktail you wanted to make, Jordan?
Yeah, I'm going to make one of my favorites called the ampersand.
Okay. So I'm going to tell us what your specs are, and I'm going to put it into the chat so that you guys don't have to write it down. I'm put it in there for you. And then as you make it, we're going to do our sort of like hospitality state of the union. That's something that, you know, we try to do every one of the happy hours, where the three of you will talk about in the various regions where you're working and living, some silver linings of bars and restaurants that are opening back up, and cool things that they've done to bring people back in. So Jordan,
my specs are in the chat.
Oh, fantastic. Easy. Great. Sweet. I don't have to type that. So he's using an ounce of Privilege, an ounce of Old Tom Gin. Are you doing Old Tom Gin, or are you doing Genever?
I'm at my cabin. I'm doing just American gin. Fantastic. I don't have either of those right now with me. I have an impressive cocktail, like of alcohol at my cabin, but most of it's Hennessy. So,
okay. All right. So, but this is a really cool.
It is traditionally Old Tom Gin, though I have found that Genever works really well in it. The malt characteristics that Genever brings, along with the herbaceous side and the juniper, brings a really interesting depth to this cocktail.
So, you know, for those of you who are with us now, and for those of you who are going to be watching this video later, the ampersand is a really fantastic equal parts cocktail that is such a great way to showcase, because I love a good Champs-Élysées, but there's a lot of people that still kind of struggle with chartreuse. And so being able to have a cognac cocktail that works so well with the other ingredients, another one being another base spirit, and then of course a lower ABV with the sweet vermouth, ends up being such a great and delicious cocktail that you all should try it. So it's equal parts.
One of the reasons I wanted to make this cocktail is that fact that it was equal parts, because there are so few cocktails that are equal parts, equal parts base and cognac being one of those kind of predominantly or early cocktail days in the 1800s. Cognac was one of the go-to spirits, and so it dominates a lot of those original cocktail books. And because of that pedigree in the cocktail world, it has a disproportionately large amount of twin-based spirit cocktails that are with cognac. So if you have friends that like rum, you've got a Between the Sheets. If you have friends that like gin, you have the Ampersand. You have friends that like rye whiskey, you've got a Vieux Carré. Sadly, they're all pretty hard to pronounce and mostly French names, but they would be more popular if they were easier to pronounce. I've had people walk up when I was guest bartending and order a Vieux Carré as a Books Carew. But it's either way, it's a fabulous cocktail, and I think you get a lot of depth out of twin bases.
I was there that day, and your Vux Carew was delicious, spot on. Really, really good. So congratulations, thank you. There's also like one of our top selling cocktails at our bar was our 50/50 Sazerac of rye and cognac. Like it's one of my personal favorites, and you don't have to decide which base spirit you want to use. You can just use both, which I love. Yvette, who's one of our who's with us today, so that she hopes that you actually had chosen your neighbor because she's Dutch. But you know, again, Yvette, if you want to pop by his cabin and drop some off, no problem.
Yvette, I have lots of it. It's just not here. It's at home in Toronto. A friend of both, actually, Donnie and I is the Charles Hardwick is a Geneva ambassador. So much the same way Kelly educates for the BNIC, he educates for the collective of Geneva distillers. And so it was in talking with him in one of these many Zoom calls we had to have cocktails with friends because we couldn't actually visit them, that I discovered the Ampersand went really well with Geneva.
And Yvette, I don't know if you would want to know this, but a lot of the malt vine that's used for most of the Geneva that's exported to the United States is actually coming from Belgium. I'm really sorry. But that's just the malt vine. Like it's not necessarily the other distillate, but yeah, it's something that I actually learned working on that project that Charles is doing now, which was really cool. I hadn't known.
That's because the Dutch are drinking it all. There's none left for export.
Yeah,
They're not sharing.
no.
Very true.
You would think that they would want to split it 50-50 with everybody else, but apparently not. Yeah, thank you. I would love to go into, so how was the cocktail? Workout?
Fabulous.
Okay.
It's got Hennessy VSOP in it.
Of course, my mistake. I would love to do our hospitality State of the Union. Michael, if you can, Mr. Holiday, if you can tell me a little bit about like some people that you've seen do some very cool stuff in DC as things are opening back up to, engage their audience to get them to like come back to bars and be excited about cocktails.
Yeah, I mean, DC, it's such a tight-knit group of people. We all treat each other like family. So all my friends are dope, right? So at Serenata, we have AJ, who has continued to put on classes and educational opportunities. She also did Black to Black, where she was a part of, where she took funds from that from those events, and it helped out like nonprofit organizations locally in DC. Allegory has like Deke and Capri and a great friend Princess over at Allegory. They have come together. They created like this amazing team. They all were in different places before the pandemic, but they wanted like-minded individuals where they can come and represent true passion and craft. You can find them if you're in DC. Service Bar, one of my mentors, Glendon Harley, he's over there. Always doing amazing things. He's a man of many hats. He has new projects opening soon. I don't know if I can talk about them, but if you don't know about Service Bar, come to DC and check it out. OKPB, I'm a true fan of that bar. OKPB It was a group of 4 individuals throughout the pandemic. They bounced around different bars. They put their funds together. They opened up this amazing bar. It has amazing classic cocktails and great atmosphere as well. It's a little speakeasy. So if you're in DC, go to Mount Pleasant area, check out OKPB. And of course, the best bar in the city is my bar, 600T. We've done great things throughout the pandemic. Even though we're closed, we still came together, sat down, and brainstorm ideas, new innovative ways to approach cocktails, great to go options. We also have Cocktail for a Cause, where we take proceeds from certain cocktails and we give back to local nonprofit organizations. So we have OKB, we have Allegory, we have Serenata, we have the best 600T, right? We have Service Bar, and there's a great bar, Linda, that's open on 8th Street. A good friend of mine, Vic, he's been working so hard over the last, I want to say 6-7 years to get this bar off the ground. He finally got enough funding. He named it in homage to his mother. He's producing amazing Caribbean food and great cocktails. So like, again, we support each other. If you see one of us outside DC, it's a representation of all of us. If I forgot a bar, don't be mad at me. Oh, the Green Zone is also a great bar.
Don't worry. What we'll do is I'll have you hop on to the event, like in our Facebook group, and have you post places people should visit. We actually have a lot of subscribers in the DMV, and so there'll be a ton of people who are, now that they're starting to go out again. Say again?
I had a group come by last weekend. They're like, "We're here to see Holiday." I was like, "Oh man, where do I know these people from?" And they're like, "Yo, Sugar and Spoon, we're subscribers. We just had to come here. We saw you're in DC, so it's already happening. It's amazing."
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, well, I'll send you a link so that you can get on there and list some of the places out that you just mentioned, because I know people are going to be like scrambling trying to write it down while you're talking. That way they can always go back and find it later. So Kelly, you're in Atlanta, but you've spent a lot of time in Sandestin and other places. Like, as you're opening up, there we go, 10 points. As you open up new places, what have you seen some of the cool stuff people have done? I mean, Florida hasn't really been shut, but.
Well, I mean, that's what I was gonna say. I'm in the South. Like, I gotta be real. Like, we didn't experience the same level of like shutdown the rest of the country did. Florida, I opened a hotel in the pandemic, so that was like wild. And then in Birmingham, and to some extent Atlanta, out of all of the markets that I work in, definitely was the most serious about it. But even then, people like we're ready to go back out. I think that, here you saw a lot of people get very creative with their outdoor spaces to expand those to make people feel more comfortable. So we saw a lot of people really build out like outdoor spaces and find ways to keep people coming, but make them feel, not too crowded. Now it's really like, there's so many things opening in Atlanta right now. I mean, it's wild. And there's been loads of things opening in the 3 markets that I work in throughout this entire year. So I think that in here, at least, people are just ready to be back out. What I do think has been really wonderful to see just kind of in our industry across the board is kind of the shift of what our guests are walking into, which has been a lot of higher wages, more care for people's in the service industry and hospitality industries, well-being and time, and ultimately, the quality of their life, which I think will ultimately extend to a better hospitality experience for guests. So for me, like, that's been one of the best things that I've kind of seen in the markets that I'm working across the board. Like, it's been something that could not continue on the way that it was in a lot of ways. And so it's been just really positive to see these changes taking place as we're opening more and more places. You raised your hand, Jordan. Do you have?
No, that was a clapping emoji of like,
okay, cool.
Taking care of service workers.
You got to learn how to interpret the weird yellow hands and what
you're right. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah. Actually, Jordan, one thing that I actually really wanted you to talk to this crowd about, that's related to a pivot, which a lot of places had to do because of COVID. One of the things that we didn't talk about earlier was phylloxera, and in terms of like how that affected cognac. And we've talked about it in happy hours before about how it popped Scotch whiskey, right? But we haven't really talked about
Yeah.
how it made this sort of like wave of wave for cognac, especially since shortly before phylloxera happened was right when like XO became a designation, right?
Yeah, I got flustered when you said 15 minutes. I training on cognac in 15 minutes is like, I don't know that I can talk that fast.
Did
You'd
you
have to
see how fast
translate it
I
later.
talked?
Exactly.
You
So
guys did a great job.
phylloxera is a bug native to North America, and I related some of phylloxera to COVID. It's very, very different. Obviously, phylloxera affected grapes, COVID affected people, but there was also an impact on cognac in the early stages of this. Now, phylloxera was the reason perhaps you've never had cognac before, because phylloxera came about in 1875, approximately in cognac. It was present in Europe before that, sometime in the mid 60s, 1860s. It entered Europe. It's a bug native to North America, and I like to kind of use the story of the Europeans with all the hallowed grounds to grow their grapes. Saw all these grape varietals in North America that were not present in Europe, and they said, okay, well, you're doing okay things with them over here, but let's see what they can do in kind of like the golden fields of France and Europe, and see what kind of grapes and wine we can make out of them. Not knowing this little bug was hitching a ride. This little bug got over there, and the grapevines of North America had sort of a symbiotic relationship with them, and rather they built up defenses against phylloxera, so that when phylloxera fed on these grapevines, were on their roots, on their leaves, later on the grapes themselves, it didn't destroy them. Whereas the European varietals, what we call the noble varietals, were utterly defenseless against this pest, and it laid waste to them. They didn't know what was going on. There's stories of them burning. One field's infected here, field A is infected, so they burn field B to protect field C, and that didn't work because it was a winged aphid. So they were unclear what was happening. By the time they figured it out, there was a lot of devastation. When we started phylloxera, we had in cognac as a whole, we had about 282,667 hectares of land devoted to grapes. After about 20 years of phylloxera killing these vines, we were down to 38,000. So we dropped over 5/6 of our fields in a 20-year span. So some of you may remember in the late 90s, agave plants started dying because they were all clones of each other and they had no tolerance to a new pest. Well, that minus all the technology to deal with that was what we were dealing with in phylloxera times. And it was actually a professor from Denison, Texas, that helped discover the ways of working going forward, which was a grafting process to take North American roots that had this kind of defense against phylloxera and graft them onto European varietals. And you heard me talk about Uni Blanc earlier. Well, Uni Blanc was a minor varietal pre-phylloxera. So this goes along with our talk on global warming as well. Uni Blanc was a minor varietal pre-phylloxera. It was Colombard and Faux Blanche pre-phylloxera that were the dominant varietals. But after grafting, think of it like an organ transplant. Some of those grafts don't take. In fact, even Uni Blanc, only 50% of the grafts take today. So it's a costly process. But Uni Blanc better represented the flavors that Faux Blanche represented pre-phylloxera. So full blanche after grafting didn't represent the same flavor profile that it did pre-phylloxera. Therefore, Uni Blanc and Uni Blanc by its nature for European, as far as European varietals went, had some tolerance to phylloxera. Now, that was super nerdy. So don't worry if you didn't follow all that. Know that it is one of the reasons that cognac is the most expensive spirit to produce, or aged cognac is the most expensive spirit to produce.
And here we are
Extremely.
140 years later and still dealing with that.
So the reason that went is Scotch was sort of, if you talk to a lot of Scotch historians, they'd finally sort of figured out how to be consistent with their blends at that point. And so it was, you know, if you were a conspiracy theorist, somebody in the Scotch world sent phylloxera to cognac. If you're not, it's just good timing that Scotch got their proverbial shit together just as cognac all died.
Yeah, I mean that was the shift, right?
Yeah.
So it was the same thing people don't think about, you know, bringing up Genever again. It was a global phenomenon because at the time the Dutch ruled the seas, and all of a sudden it was the English Empire, and like weird, we had this shift to dry gin. It was also a lot cheaper to make, so there was that too. But yeah. Thank you. That was super helpful. Sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask if there were any Texans in the chat, because actually, because of that, Denison, Texas, this little town in Texas, is actually the sister city to Cognac, which I always think is like a really fun point to make. Texas saved Cognac.
There's a sign up in town that talks about it.
Texas actually saved European grape growing, but also
Jordan, it was
cognac.
my understanding that they had some other, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was specifically because Pierre Vialli, when it went to Denison, because they had brought some other grape clones over, but they were failing in Cognac specifically because the soils weren't the same. And so he went to Denison, Texas because of the soils specific, those chalky soils specific to Cognac. But were there other regions
It was
that
also
had
the
success?
grafting though. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was also the grafting, but yeah, to this day, you can find American varietals growing in Cognac because they need them for the grafting process. So
wow,
they're all grown there solely so that they can be chopped up and grafted onto the European varietals and then replanted somewhere else.
cool. I didn't know that it went so far as all of that. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's to this day we still have to do the process that's 150 years old at this point.
Yeah, it's cool.
It felt like too important of a piece, no matter like how nerdy it is. It felt like too important of a piece, especially since we were talking about a lot of COVID pivots. People don't really think about how that short period of time affected Cognac both in the medium term and in the long term. It's one of the things that has created more of a demand because it has a lot more historical significance than other spirits. It's in a lot of early cocktail books, and there was a huge time where you really couldn't get the product.
Yeah, and they've had so many setbacks. The Cognac region is nothing if not resilient. They've had blockades of no trade for chunks of a time, like, and this is historically an export. So like this particular spirit has just experienced setback after setback, and they keep going, man. Resilient. It's awesome.
And they have to be resilient. They have to deal with French people all the time. You know what I mean? So I'm going to get in trouble for that one, but that's fine.
Yeah, it was.
No, it's fine.
We talked about the Dutch.
But it's the important thing to say that, like, without phylloxera, if phylloxera had not happened, we're not saying whiskey would not have gone on a rise. Whiskey's very good as well. All my grandparents are Scottish. So I grew up drinking single malt. That got me into this crazy bar world and got me curious about different flavors and how they're made. but your back bars would look very different. You know, you go walk into a massive whiskey bar, even a minor whiskey bar or a cocktail bar often has 50 to maybe 100 different facings of whiskey, and they might have 2 cognacs, and they might be the same brand, and it's just a VS and a VSOP. Yet without phylloxera, you might see a 50-50 split of whiskey and brandies in general, because when cognac went down, that also, I mean, phylloxera also affected French brandy, it affected Spanish brandy, it affected a lot of the world's brandy production, because it takes, we didn't talk about this in distillation, 9 bottles of wine to distill down to 1 bottle of eau de vie. So it takes a lot of wine to make this stuff. And when the preeminent brandies go down, no other brandies are really being produced, because people now start, whiskey becomes more fashionable. Started with Scotch, then went to Irish whiskey. And then the Americas really got on their horse and said, we need to start producing our own good whiskey, because there's now a market for it. Whereas previous to that, it was like, you couldn't produce, they didn't, on the East Coast, they didn't have the grapes really to produce good brandy. So they just weren't, they were buying global brandies, and rum was the other spirit out there. So without phylloxera, our back bars would look very different today.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Holly, sorry to answer your question. I had asked Jordan to talk about phylloxera. It hit cognac in 1875, which was only 5 years after XO even was created as a designation, as like as an age statement for cognac. So it was, just when it had been decided that here we go, this is XO and this is how we're defining it. Then 5 years later, phylloxera hit. So that wasn't really good for anybody. So while we still have everyone, we can spend a little extra time getting a little bit nerdier for people that want to stick around. But I want to get into the trivia, because we have people that have actually been paying close attention to the things, the nonsense that we've been prattling off about.
What 2 historical events introduced cognac to the Black American community?
All right. Sometimes there's like a flurry of like 20 people who posted. Oh, boom.
Oh, there
Daddy
you go.
got it. That was fast. Boom. Okay, awesome. World War II and the Harlem Renaissance. That's awesome.
Thank everyone for being here. Unfortunately, I do have to get back. The shift is starting to pick up pretty crazy. Jazz is going and they really need me. But I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate everyone here. Thank you. And hopefully when you guys are in DC, you can come by 600T and we can meet.
Oh, as soon as we're off this happy hour, we're all heading to your place right now. So we'll see you soon.
All right, guys.
You can't go to his bar on June 20th to 24th. He won't be there.
Oh, sweet. That's when he's going on the trip?
That's when he'll be in Cognac with me.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank
Awesome,
you, guys.
Mr. Holiday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, Mr. Holiday. What is the name of the paleontologists and geologists who came up with the various crew designations?
Wow.
All right, guys. I mean, I'll give you a hint. It's French. So she may have said it and you thought that maybe she was blowing her nose.
Trisha jumped in.
Okay, you're super close. It is not Louis Leakey, although I do love that. Trish, you're super close. Trisha, you're super close. No, his last name was not Cognac, but that would be pretty cool if it were.
Henri Cocon. There we go. Sandra got it.
Okay, Sandra, very good. Awesome. Perfect. Nailed it. All right, cool.
We talked about it a few times, mentioned it a few times. What currently is the grape varietal most used or predominant grape varietal in Cognac? And bonus, if you can name a second grape varietal we spoke about.
Jeff and Susan got it. They were the first ones to nail it.
Perfect.
Do you want someone to nail a second one, or do you want to stick with the one? I don't want you to have to like give away the farm.
No, just stick with the one. You'll
Okay,
get
great. All
whatever
right.
I find in
Perfect.
Excel.
You know, we have 2 of our 3 fantastic panelists still with us. If you guys have any, you want to get in-depth nerdy about cognac, please feel free to like message stuff or come off of mute and ask questions. Otherwise, we're going to let everyone get on with their dinner and their evening, and we can continue all of this in the private Facebook group. You guys were really terrific. Thank you so much for taking your time to join us and to talk to the Shaker and Spoon fam about this not mysterious category that more people should know about.
I would say as a closing point, well, thank you for having me, but also there was a lot of stuff talked about tonight, and cognac is one of those gifts that keeps on giving the more you delve in, because as I was told very early on, I wanted to know all the little nerdy things and like, how is this made? How do you get this flavor? How do you get that? And I was told very early on by our 8th generation master blender, cognac is about generalities. We have a belief in that if it's from this crew or this year, whatever, it's going to do this, but we're constantly tasting to make sure that that's correct. And so it's all about nuance and little things on how it's treated, and it's beautiful in that way. It's very much like wine in that way, that you can have different wineries across the street from each other planting the same grapes and producing something entirely different, and that's the beauty of cognac. And I think it is the gift that keeps on giving, because the more you taste of it, the more you're surprised and the more you're impressed. And as far as value goes, it's not nearly the value that single malt scotches are, for the same age statements, for the same complexity, for all of that. So I hope this gave you the courage, this package you got of 3, and this talk gave you the courage to go out and try other cognacs, because it truly is a wonderful category.
Holly, to answer your question, what's a must add to your bar in terms of cognac? If you put that into the Facebook group, like just do that post in the Facebook group, I'll actually get multiple people to respond to that, and then you'll also get a lot of other Shaker and Spoon subscribers and fans to tell you what they got and what have been their successes. And we'll also, like, I'll respond to that with like the ampersand cocktail that Jordan made, which apparently Debbie is going to make one right now. And then I'll also do one that was really cool, that actually one of our subscribers, Jimmy, took Kelly's cocktail, which is called Cherche la Femme, and he did a Cherche la Femme Presidente. So he did like one of my favorite rum cocktails and blended it using some of the ingredients from her cocktail.
I love that. That's
into
great.
a new drink, and it was one of the few that I actually made, because I didn't crack the box yet, except to go and get the syrup out so I could make this drink.
Oh, that's awesome.
So,
I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, Holly, post something in the group, and I'll get some folks to respond to it, and I'll put the recipes in there, and I'm sure folks will be very helpful. But thank you guys again so much, and we'll send
Thank
another one
you.
to Holiday, and you guys are awesome as usual. And we'll see you later.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.